shade sunrise cutting over Black Crown brink. Hardline coats flaring as the cliff winds kink. Rock bite vortices snapping on the Warpstone Trail. Dry crash tremors pulsing in a hard-born flail. Flat crest hoof strakes hammering a stiff claw glide. Riff all riders lunging where the high streams slide. Riff ball charging a bold line fire, full voices rumbling through the dirt hung wire. Quick flare rebels driving in a rough strike while steel-born spirits pushing with the climb edges high. Let that quake turn loose and the ridge is higher. We're breaking in a bold line fire. Cold grit engines rattling in a split wind reel. Slow burn shadows drifting down a dust-storm hill. Shade warp spirals clashing in a firm cut throw. Tall break phantoms running where the flat sides glow. Heat fork pulses rising in a sharp span stride. Black Crown outliers bursting in a raw force ride. Riff bolt charging a bold line fire, full voices rumbling through the dirt hung wire. Quick flare rebels driving in a rough strike while steel-born spirits pushing where the climb edges high. Let that quake turn loose and the ridge is higher. We're breaking in a bold line fire. Gliding on the windswept plain. Low crest whispers humming in the cold-born rain. Far break wanderers rolling in a fierce bright flow. Rift-bound hearts roaring where the red winds grow. Bright dawn tearing over the Grimville sweep. Hard grain jackets snapping as the red vines leap. Rocked in shock lines jolting on a raw cut rise. Dry lash rumble firing through the canyon skies. Flatwood hoof beats cracking in a tight bound glide. Riders bolting where the high banks slide. Stam core run in a red-born blaze. Full strike shells drum through the dust line maze. Quick fall rebels driving in a sharp front phase. Bold ram spirits lifting in a longwood craze. Let that earth jolt break, make the wild path raise. We're flying in a red-born blaze. Crosswind roar. Slow press shadows whipping past the slate back floor. Dust line tremors bucking in a rim-like spin. Tall ridge phantoms bursting where the flats fold thin. Heat red pulses rising in a blunt cut stride. Grimville outlies surging in a deep claw. Ride. Stamp core run in a red-born blaze. drifting in a long walk craze. Let that earth jolt break, make the wild path raise. We're flying in a red-born blaze. Drifting on a far crest lane, low-lit murmurs rolling in the storm-worn strain. Fire crest wanders gliding in a raw, bright flow. Grim bell hearts thundering where the steel winds blow. Day steel glare slicing over Red Cliff span. Hard turn jackets whipping as the cut winds fan. Right line shock waves bucking on a sharp bend trail. Dry crest echoes rumbling in a force-laced flail. Long bank hoof steps punching in a grit strike glide. Storm rack riders launching where the high path slide. Storm rack driving a bullfire run, full clash hollers rolling through the canyon sun. Quick burst rebels tearing in a hard-won stun. Raw crest spirits pushing till the last mile's done. Let that ground be cracked, make the wild land shun. We're burning in a bullfire run. Burn motor snarling in a swing wind roar. Slope of jaw shadows cutting past a dust line floor. Dust coal spirals thumping in a rough cut spin. Tall room phantom surging where the flats cave in. Heat press tremor spilling in a deep track stride. Red Cliff drifters racing in a steel-wide ride. Storm rack driving a bullfire run, full clash hollers rolling through the canyon sun. Quick burst rebels tearing in a hard stun. Raw crest spirits pushing till the last mile's done. Let that ground be cracked, make the wild land shun. We're burning in a bullfire run. Drifting on a stock trail sweep. Low on murmurs trembling in the long wind deep. Fire crest roamers cutting in a fierce born flow. Red Cliff hearts roaring where the bright stones grow. through the black spiral. Hard volt jacket slashing in the high-cut sun. Rock flare spirals bucking on a jackline crest. Cold band pressure sharing on a deep worn chest. Flat shock hoof steps thunder in a grit spine drive. Stamp line riders pivoting where the fall paths dive. Hard bolt stamp line, a raw cold blaze. Full crash hollows firing through the ridge-bound haze. Quick clash rebels cutting in a steel bone phase. Bone flesh spirits pushing in a hard front race. Let that quake erupt, shake the whole wild maze. We're storming in a raw cold blaze. Frame motors grinding in a rough wind throw. Dry riff shadows twisting where the low banks go. Dust blade vortices snapping in a shock line spin. Tall crust outlies carving where the flats cave in. Heat board tremors climbing with a fall strike light. Great turn phantoms raging in a long force ride. Hard bolt stamp line, a raw cold blaze. Full crash hollows firing through the ridge-bound haze. Quick clash rebels cutting in a steel-born phase. Bolt flash spirits pushing in a hard front race. Let that quake erupt, shake the whole wild maze. We're storming in a raw cold blaze. Low shot murmurs trembling in a dust line gleam. Far shade roamers cutting in a fierce-born flow. Black spire heart surging where the red winds throw. Slicing through the grain fall span. Our Chris coats buckling as a high winds fan. Stone whip currents trembling on the chalk edge climb. Dry turn engines roaring in a gravel time. Flatline blue beats cracking on a hard-bone sweep. Steel run riders diving where the downbank steep. Steel run revolver in a sharp wind blaze. Full broke voices climbing through the bronzoline haze. Quick storm rebels driving in a red shock phase. Core burn spirits rising with a fierce front raise. Let that pulse ignite, shake the rough lands maze. We're carving in a sharp wind blaze. We're carving in a sharp wind blaze. Humming in a dust-grown spin. Low-cut shadows coiling where the flats drop thin. Dust shot spirals bucking in a rimfire throw. Tall roaring phantoms cutting through the canyon floor. Heat ash tremors pushing in a rockline stride. Gray path charges leaning in a long spine ride. Steel run revolver in a sharp wind blaze. Full broke voices climbing through the bronzoline haze. Quick storm rebels driving in a red shock phase. Coal burn spirits rising with a fierce front raise. Let that pulse ignite, shake the rough lands maze. We're carving in a sharp one blaze. Fragments drifting on a frost-swept trail. Low-lift murmurs echo in the copper veil. Far crest Roma sliding in a bowway flow. Grain fall hearts thundering where the star winds go. Across a clay storm sweep, hot spent coats twisting where the rift tines leap. Slate white tremors shudder in a brim skew bend. Dry tone engines snarling like they'll never end. Broad clay footfalls ringing in a long shock stride. Outmarch riders pivot into high bank slide. Cold flight, full flare voices cutting through the salt edge light. Sharp clam rebels rumbling in a red pulse bite. Strong line spirits blazing in a fire-born fight. Let the ground beat quake till the whole sky bright. We're running in a steel cold flight. Cold span motors thundering in a cliff-hung roar. Loom shadow figures weaving by the kiln worn floor. Dust spine spirals vaulting in a sharp wave spin. Bold rise outliers charging where the flats cave in. Heat draw tremors swelling in a run strike glide. Tall bent phantoms pressing in a grit bound ride. Overburst drive in a steel cold flight. Full flare voices cutting through the salt edge light. Sharp clam rebels rumbling in a red bull's bite. Strong line spirits blazing in a fire-born fight. Let that ground beat quake till the whole sky bright. We're running in a steel cold flight. Stone fragments drifting on the white crest air. Low crack murmurs floating through the heat-worn glare. Fire song nomads gliding in a bold bright flow. Clay storm hearts pounding where the wind paths grow. spark daylight, tearing down the dust for drift. Hard crest coats whipping as the side winds lift. Rock hull spirals bouncing on the slate bone crack. Dry tone shock bands bursting on the canyon's back. Pole crest hoof marks slamming in a long line slide. Hell trail riders pivoting where the fast winds ride. Hell trail ramming in a brute force flame. Full round hollers booming through the wild back frame. Sharp jaw rebels charging in a grit bound aim. Redbird spirits firing with a no limit claim. Let that ground wave strike shake the far bank frame. We're rolling in a brute force flame. Cold fog motors pounding in a harsh wind spin. Low ridge shadows darken where the flats grow thin. Dust slash eddies ripping in a quick front dance. Cragline figures lunging in a steel-born trance. Heat band tremors kicking in a rough stall glide. Tall crest phantom sweeping in a raw drive stride. Hell trail ramming in a brute force flame. Full round hollers booming through the wild back frame. Sharp jaw rebels charging in a grit bound aim. Redbird spirits firing with a no limit claim. Let that ground wave strike shake the far bank frame. We're rolling in a brute force flame. Night forge scattered, drifting on the dry bank field. Lowering murmurs faulting as the dusk winds yield. White crest roamers gliding in a fierce burn flow. Dust-bound hearts rising where the high storms go. Hell trail ram running a brute force flame. Full brand hollers booming through the wild back frame. Sharp jaw rebels charging in a grit bound aim. Redbird spirits firing with a no limit claim. Let that ground wave strike shake the far bank frame. We're rolling in a brute force flame. Flare morning, slashing down a raven-cut drift. Hard crisp jackets whipping as the dust waves lift. Stone crack whirl bands jolting on the iron low ridge. Dry burst rumble rolling past a canyon bridge. Grain shock hoof marks hammering a hot fall stride. Veering where the rough winds slide. Backline rampage in a force-born run. Full strike voices cutting through the flatland sun. Sharp crest rebels rising in a red-bound stud. Raw spirits charging till the long mile's done. Let that earth shake here. Let the wild front run. We're tearing in a force-born run. We're tearing in a force-born run. Cold shift motors buzzing in a jag wind roar. shaken by the valley floor. Dust 12 spirals rattling in a sharp span sweep. Tall cracked phantoms pushing from the foothill deep. Heat line tremors climbing with a fast cut glide. Raven core drifters pressing in a high chloride. Backline rampage in a force-borne run. Full strike voices cutting through the flatland sun. Sharp crest rebels rising in a red-bound stun. Raw volt spirit charging till the long mile's done. Let that earth shake hit, let the wild front run. We're tearing in a force-borne run. Night burn sparks creeping on the far trail rim. Low shake murmurs humming in the dusk wind dim. Wide crest nomads moving in a fierce bright flow. Raven cut hearts pounding where the deep storms go. Cracked daylight ripping over frostband wire. Hard mesh coat snapping as a rough bank's fire. Grain slim vortices jolting on the mid-cliff seam. Dry gorge echoes thundering from a steel-born stream. Flat peak rhythms hammer on the cold track rise. Hard trail riders vaulting through the thick-cut skies. Hard trail uprise in a deep core blaze. Full shock roars tearing through the ridge-run maze. Quick bend rebels climbing in a force-bound phase. Rock flare spirits burning with a long-range craze. Let that ground beat surge, watch the wildlands raise. We're driving in a deep core blaze. Cold shiver engines rumbling in a frost wind spin. Low crack shadows racing where the lines grow thin. Dust wake spiral striking in a rough folk sweep. Stone fade phantoms cutting from the canyons deep. Slow crest tremors rising in a blunt force glide. Gray branch outlaws pressing in a storm-cut stride. Hard trail uprise in a deep core blaze. Full shock roars tearing through the ridge-run maze. Quick bend rebels climbing in a force-bound phase. Rock flare spirits burning with a long-range craze. Let that ground beat surge, watch the wildlands raise. We're driving in a deep core blaze. cross-bent hearts hammering where the high winds blow. Surging through the Iron Veil climb, a hard-cold jacket snapping in a fast rock prime. Crash dust vortices splitting on the jag rim sweep, dry force pressure roaring from the gravel deep. Cliffline footfalls pounding in a sharp draw rise. Drift strike riders flaring where the red bound lies. Rebellion driving a full thrust flare, bold clash hollow slicing through the canyon air. Quick grail phantom storming in a brute force glare. Rockburn spirits rising with a no fear stare. Let that rumble break, shake the Long Ridge Bear. We're running in a full thrust flare. Engines grinding in a rough wind spin. Slope of cut shadows lunging as the flats grind thin. Dustline vectors bucking in a hard span roar. Stone crest figures diving down the raw edge floor. Heat pulse tremor stretching in a black wind glide. Front outliers pushing with a storm back stride. Rebellion driving a full thrust flare, bold clash hollow slicing through the canyon air. Quick rail phantom storming in a brute force glare. Rockburn spirits rising with a no fear stare. Let that rumble break, shake the Long Ridge Bear. We're running in a full thrust flare. On the steel crest plain, low rhine murmurs trembling in a salt storm rain. Far stone roamers shifting in a raw bright flow. Iron Veil hearts roaring where the high winds blow. carving through the crimson forge span. Hard plate jackets jarring as a split gust ran. Stone flare burst ricocheting on a bent crisp seam. Dry clang tremors firing in a higher stream. Wide cut foot beats battering a firm cast stride. Wild class riders pivoting at the sharp wind's side. Wild class run line in a fierce grit fire. Full burst voices lifting like a steel wide choir. Quick lash outlaws pressing in a bold front higher. Strong crisp spirit surging with a raw bone desire. Let that ground beat tear, make the heartlands tire. We're racing in a fierce grit fire. We're racing in a fierce grit fire. Cold mesh engines grumbling in a cross-track spin. Hard shade silhouettes slicing where the flats grow thin. Dust crack spirals rattling in a scorch lane flame. Tall strike riders lunging with a hard-bound swing. Heat crisp pulses rising in a run-fast drive. Crimson forge outliers charging on a deep-cut dive. Wild class run line in a fierce grit fire. Full burst voices lifting like a steel wired choir. Quick lash outlaws pressing in a bold front higher. Strong crisp spirit surging with a raw bone desire. Let that ground beat tear, make the heartlands tire. We're racing in a fierce grit fire. Drifting on a dusk-friend plane. Low grid murmurs trembling in the white burn rain. Fall strike wanderers gliding in a heat line sway. Crimson foes' hearts beating through the long bright day. Amberline daylight slicing through the iron veil grid. Hard crisp mantles twisting as the updraft skid. Rock fault surges trembling on a Suresh shift peak. Drive on quivers bursting in a deep wide streak. Ground lash hoof beats hammer on the bare cliff course. A thunder crisp riders leaning on a torque-borne force. Thunder crisp ascension in a highball blaze. Full shock collars rising through the warpline haze. Quick bone drifter surging in a loud steel phase. Strong hot spirits lifting with a bright core race. Let that earth pull strike, send the whole field days. We're soaring in a high volt blaze. Cold frame engines rattling in a fault draft spin. Riff side silhouettes cutting where the plains grow thin. Dust train spiral shivering in a heatless swing. Tall flint rovers bounding with a straight force ring. Night burn fragments drifting on a far-edge plain. Lowlands murmurs buzzing in the gravel-born rain. White Chris nomads tracing in a heat-bright sway. Iron bell hearts thundering through the raw strike day. Clover dust whirling on a midday crest. Guitar cases rattling the truck bed rest. Main Street muffins warm in a paper sack. We swap half secrets on the old dirt track. Hilltop sun rider days roll free. Golden laughter spilling wild from me. Skipping rhythms through the orchard shade. Echoes jumping where the cool streams fade. Hilltop sun rider days roll free. Bright as a spark in a fresh born breeze. The doors pull wide. Kids tossing roadside flowers inside. Honey jar light on the rich fence beams. We chase shadows like they're part of our dreams. Hilltop sunrider days roll free. Golden laughter spilling wild from me. Skipping rhythm through the orchard shade. Echoes jumping where the cool streams fade. Hilltop sunrider days roll free. Bright as a spark in a fresh born breeze. Path when the hillside glows. Just feet in motion where the warm wind blows. Every turn blooms something new to see. A little more life in a wandering spree. coming from a pack. Painted fences sway in the evening hue. High grass shimmers like it's dancing too. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on, wavelet laughter keeping us strong. Radio humming through the winding pines, freedom jumping in a sunstruck mind. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on, feeling alive where the wide winds spawn. The shoreline sings, just breathing wheels and a road that rings. If tomorrow calls, we'll chase that sound wherever it leads. Joy's always found. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on. Skyline snaps against the ribbon toed rim. Axle burst, thunder climbs out of the undercut limbs. Tension gravel spits red arcs beneath iron scar wheels. Heat stained knuckles brace tight where the night wind peels. A jaguar tremor flicks upward, slicing the whole ridge thin. Cinder drag reborn raw, engine split the dark. Hammer pulse squires ignite. Chrome field spark. Long drive drifters strike roots no map can mark. Red steel breath surges, carving its primal arc. Every heartbeat smashes forward like a quake-lit bar. Yeah! Fuel blue smoke swirls tight through the canyon's plated throat. Shock vein hails flex hard as the side cliff floats. Static grid lashes bright over coil wound stone. Rear frame tremors ripple under marrow and bone. Far surge momentum slams wild through a copper line zone. Cinder drag reborn raw, engine split the dark. Hammer pulse quas ignite in a chrome field spark. Long drive drifters strike roots no map can mark. Red steel breath surges, carving its primal arc. Every heartbeat smashes forward like a quake-lit bomb. Night raving echoes climb from the shale vein scar. Pulse-fold embers drift past a half-burned star. Raven torque riders stand where the ground beats jar, and the next wild world begins beneath their spar. daylight slicing through the iron veil grid. Hard crisp manholes twisting as the updraft skid. Rock vault surges trembling on a surf peak. Drive oil quivers bursting in a deep wide stream. Ground lash roof beats hammer on the bare cliff course. Thundercrest riders leaning on a torque-borne force. Thundercrest ascension in a high-volt blaze. Full shock hollers rising through the warp-blind haze. Quick bone drifter surging in a loud steel face. Strong our spirits lifting with a bright cold rays. Let that earth full strike send the whole field dazed. We're soaring in a high-volt blaze. Frame engines rattling in a fault drive spin. Riff side silhouettes cutting where the plains grow thin. Dust train spiral shivering in a heat lash swing. Tall flint rovers bounding with a straight force ring. Heat for tremors blooming in a long wave stride. Iron Veil outlanders driving with a hard crest pride. Thundercrest ascension in a high-volt blaze. Full shock hollers rising through the warp-blind haze. Quick bone drifter surging in a loud steel face. Strong our spirits lifting with a bright core rays. Let that earth pull strike send the whole field dazed. We're soaring in a high-volt blaze. Lowlands murmurs buzzing in the gravel-born rain. Wide crest nomads tracing in a heat-bright sway. Iron Veil hearts thundering through the raw strike day. Strike daylight carving through the crimson folk span. Hard plate jackets jarring as a split gust ran. Stone flare burst ricocheting on a bent crest seam. Dry clang trummers firing in a high extreme. Wide cut foot beats batter in a firm cast stride. Wild clash riders pivoting at the sharp wind side. Wild clash run line in a fierce grid fire. Full burst voices lifting like a steel wired choir. Quick lash outlaws pressing in a bold front higher. Strong crest spirit surging with a raw born desire. Let that ground be tear, make the heartlands tire. We're racing in a fierce grid fire. Cold mesh engines grumbling in a cross-track spin. Heart-shaped silhouettes slicing where the flats grow thin. Dust crack spirals rattling in a scorched lane flame. Tall strike riders lunging with a hard-bound swing. Heat crest pulses rising in a run-fast drive. Crimson Ford cowboys charging on a deep-cut dive. Wild class run line in a fierce grid fire. Full burst voices lifting like a steel wire choir. Quick glass outlaws pressing in a bold front higher. Strong crest spirit surging with a raw-born desire. Let that ground beat tear, make the heartlands tire. We're racing in a fierce grid fire. Night run sparks drifting on a dusk frame plane. Low grid murmurs trembling in the wide burn rain. Fall strike wanderers gliding in a heat line sway. Crimson forked hearts beating through the long bright day. Iron shade sunrise cutting over black chrome brink. Hardline coats flaring as the cliff winds kink. Rock bound vortices snapping on the warp stone trail. Dry crest tremors pulsing in a hard-born flail. Flat crest hoof strikes hammer in a stiff claw glide. Riff fold riders lunging where the high stream slide. Riff fold charging a bowl line 5-4 and voices rumbling through the dirt hung wide. Quick flare rebels driving in a rough strike choir. Steelborn spirits pushing with the climb edges high. Let the quake turn loose, seeing the ridges high. We're breaking in a bowl line fire. Cold grid engines rattling in a split wind reel. Slow burn shadows drifting down a dust-strewn hill. Shade warp spirals clashing in a firm cut throw. Tall break phantoms running where the flat sides glow. Heat forge pulses rising in a sharp span stride. Black crone outlies bursting in a raw force ride. Riff folk charging a bowl line 5-4 and voices rumbling through the dirt hung wide. Quick flare rebels driving in a rough strike choir. Steelborn spirits pushing with the climb edges high. Let the quake turn loose, seeing the ridges higher. We're breaking in a bold line fire. Cinders gliding on the windswept plain. Low crest whispers humming in the cold-born rain. Fog break wanderers rolling in a fierce bright flow. Rift-bound hearts roaring where the red winds grow. ridge vines leap. Rocked in shock lines jolting on a raw cut rise. Dry lash rumble firing through the canyon skies. Flatwood hoof beats cracking in a tight-bound glide. Iron rush riders bolting where the high banks slide. Stamco run in a red-bone blaze. Full strike shouts run through the dust line maze. Quick fall rebels driving in a sharp front face. Bold tramp spirits lifting in a long wild craze. Let that earth jolt break. Make the wild path raise. We're flying in a red-bone blaze. Cold mesh engines grinding in a crosswind roar. Slow press shadows whipping past the slate back floor. Dust line tremors bucking in a rim lock spin. Tall ridge phantoms bursting where the flats fold thin. Heat brave pulses rising in a blunt cut stride. Grim veil outliers surging in a deep claw ride. Stamco run in a red-bone blaze. Full strike shouts rumbling the dust line maze. Quick fall rebels driving in a sharp front face. Bold tramp spirits lifting in a long wild craze. Let that earth jolt break. Make the wild path raise. We're flying in a red-bone blaze. Lane. Low-lit murmurs rolling in the storm-worn strain. Firecrest wanders gliding in a raw, bright flow. Grimble hearts thundering where the steel winds blow. Day steel glare slicing over red cliff span. Hard turn jackets whipping as the cut winds fan. Rockline shockwaves booking on a sharp bend trail. Dry crest echoes rumbling in a four-slace flail. Long bank hoof steps punching in a grit strike glide. Storm rack riders launching where the high path slide. Storm rack driving a bullfire run. Full clash hollers rolling through the canyon sun. Quick burst rebels tearing in a hardborn stun. Rocker spirits pushing till the last mile's done. Let that ground beat crack, make the wildlands shun. We're burning in a bold fire run. Cold burn motor snarling in a swing wind roar. Sloper jaw shadows cutting past the dust line floor. Dust core spirals thumping in a rough cut spin. Tall rim phantoms surging where the flats cave in. Heat press trim is spilling in a deep track stride. Red cliff drifters racing in a steel wide ride. Storm rag driving a bold fire run. Full clash hollers rolling through the canyon sun. Quick burst rebels tearing in a hardball stun. Raucous spirits pushing till the last mile's done. Let that ground beat crack, make the wildlands shun. We're burning in a bold fire run. Forge motes drifting on a stark trail sweep. Low on murmurs trembling in the long wind deep. Far crest roamers cutting in a fierce bone flow. Red cliff hearts roaring where the bright storms grow. Crest moaning, ripping through the black spire run. Hardboiled jacket slashing in the high-cut sun. Rock flare spirals bucking on a jag lane crest. Cold band pressure shattering on a deep worn chest. Flat shock hoof steps thunder in a grit spine drive. Fall paths dive. Hard road stamp line in a raw cold blaze. Full crash hollows fire through the ridge-bound haze. Quick clash rebels cutting in a steel-born phase. Bold flare spirits pushing in a hard front race. Let that quake erupt, shake the whole wild maze. We're storming in a raw cold blaze. Frame motors grinding in a rough wind throw. Dry riff shadows twisting where the low banks go. Dust blade vortices snapping in a shock line spin. Tall crust outliers carving where the flats cave in. Heat board tremors climbing with a false strike glide. Great turn phantoms raging in a long force ride. Hard bolt stamp line in a raw cold blaze. Full crash hollers fight through the ridge-bound haze. Quick clash rebels cutting in a steel-born phase. Bold flare spirits pushing in a hard front race. Let that quake erupt, shake the whole wild maze. We're storming in a raw cold blaze. Night fork cinders floating on a broad cliff scene. Low shot murmurs trembling in a dust line gleam. Five shade roamers cutting in a fierce-born flow. Black spire hearts surging where the red winds throw. daylight slicing through the grain fall span. Hard crest coats buckling as a high wind's fan. Stone whip currents trembling on the chalk edge climb. Dry turn engines roaring in a gravel time. Flatline boot beats cracking on a hard-bone sweep. Steel run riders diving where the downbank's steep. Steel run revolver in a sharp wind blaze. Full broke voices climbing through the bronzoline haze. Quick storm rebels driving in a red shock phase. Cold-burn spirits rising with a fierce front breeze. Let that pulse ignite, shake the rough lands maze. We're carving in a sharp wind blaze. Shadows cold and where the flats drop thin. Dust striped spirals bucking in a rimfire throw. Towering phantoms cutting through the canyon flow. Heated tremors pushing in a rockline stride. Gray path chargers leaning in a long spine ride. Steel run revolver in a sharp wind blaze. Voices climbing through the bronzoline haze. Quick storm rebels driving in a red shock phase. Cold-burn spirits rising with a fierce front raise. Let that pulse ignite, shake the rough lands maze. We're carving in a sharp wind blaze. Fragments drifting on a frost-swept trail. Low lift murmurs echo in the Copperville. Far crest roamers sliding in a boatway flow. Rainfall hearts thundering where the star winds go. Across a clay storm sweep. Hard span coats twisting where the riff lines leap. Sled wire tremors shudder in a brim skew bend. Dry tone engine snarling like they'll never end. Broad clay footfalls ringing in a long shock stride. Outmarch riders pivoting as the high bank slide. Overburst driving a steel cold flight. Full flare voices cutting through the salt edge light. Shark limb rebels rumbling in a red pulse bite. Strong line spirits blazing in a far bone fight. Let that ground beat, quake, tilt the whole sky bright. We're running in a steel core flight. Cold span motors thundering in the cliff-hung roar. Lone shadow figures weaving by the kiln-worn floor. Dust by spirals vaulting in a sharp wave spin. Bold rise outliers charging where the flats cave in. Heat draw tremors swelling in a run-strike glide. Tall burn phantoms pressing in a grip-bound ride. Overburst driving a steel car fly. Full flare voices cutting through the salt edge light. Shark clam rebels rumbling in a red pulse bite. Strong line spirits blazing in a far bonfire. Let that ground beat quake, tilt the whole sky bright. We're running in a steel core flight. Drifting on the white crisp air. Low crack murmurs floating through the heat-warm glare. Far-sown nomads gliding in a bow-bright flow. Clay storm hearts pounding where the wind paths grow. Spark daylight tearing down the dust for drift. Hard crest coves whipping as the side winds lift. Rock curl spirals bouncing on the slate bone crack. Dry tone shock bands bursting on the canyon's back. Bull crest hoof marks slamming in a long line slide. Trail riders pivoting where the fast winds ride. Hell trail ramp run a brute force flame. Full round hollers booming through the wildback frame. Sharp jaw rebels charging in a grip-bound aim. Red burst spirits firing with a no-limit claim. Let that ground wave strike, shake the fire bank frame. We're rolling in a brute force flame. Force motors pounding in a harsh wind spin. Low red shadows darting where the flaps grow thin. Dust flash eddies ripping in a quick front dance. Cragline figures lunging in a steel-born trance. Heat band tremors kicking in a rough stall glide. Crest phantom sweeping in a raw drive stride. Hell trail ramp run a brute force flame. Full round hollers booming through the wildback frame. Sharp jaw rebels charging in a grit-bound aim. Red burst spirits firing with a no-limit claim. Let that ground wave strike, shake the far bank frame. We're rolling in a brute force flame. drifting on the dry bank field. Lowering murmurs faulting as the dusk winds yield. Wide crest roamers gliding in a fierce burn flow. Dust-bound hearts rising where the high storms go. Flare moaning, slashing down the raven-cut drift. Hard crisp jackets whipping as the dust waves lift. Stone cracked world bands jolting on the iron low ridge. Dry burst rumble rolling past the canyon bridge. Grain shark hoof marks hammering a hot fall stride. Backline riders veering where the rough winds slide. Backline rampage in a force-born run. Full strike forces cutting through the flatland sun. Sharp crest rebels rising in a red-bound stun. Raw bolt spirits charging till the long mile's done. Let that earth shake hit, let the wild front run. We're tearing in a force-born run. Shift motors buzzing in a jag-wind roar. Clay sharp shadows flicking by the valley floor. Dust welt spirals rattling in a sharp span sweep. Tall crag phantoms pushing from the foothill deep. Heat line tremors climbing with a fast cut glide. Raven cold drifters pressing in a high chloride. Backline rampage in a force-born run. Full strike voices cutting through the flatland sun. Sharp crest rebels rising in a red-bound stun. Raw bolt spirits charging till the long mile's done. Let that earth shake hit, let the wild front run. We're tearing in a force-born run. Night burn sparks creeping on the fall trail rim. Low shake murmurs humming in the dusk wind dim. Wide crisp nomads moving in a fierce bright flow. Raven cut hearts pounding where the deep storms go. hard mesh coat snapping as a rough banks fire. Grain slim vortices jolting on the mid-cliff seam. Dry gorge echoes thundering from a steel-born stream. Flat peak rhythms hammer on the cold track rise. Hog trail riders vaulting through the thick-cut skies. Hog trail uprise in a deep core blaze. Full shock roars tearing through the ridge run maze. Quick band rebels climbing in a force-bound phase. Rock flesh spirits burning with a long-range craze. Let that ground beat surge, watch the wildlands race. We're driving in a deep core blaze. Cold shiver engines rumbling in a frost wind spin. Low cracked shadows racing where the lines grow thin. Dust wake spiral striking in a rough force sweep. Stone fade phantoms cutting from the canyons deep. Slow crest tremors rising in a blunt force glide. Gray branch outlaws pressing in a storm-cut stride. Hog trail uprise in a deep core blaze. Full shock roars tearing through the ridge run maze. Quick band rebels climbing in a force-bound phase. Rock flare spirits burning with a long-range craze. Let that ground beat surge, watch the wildlands raise. We're driving in a deep core blaze. Drifting on the frost-lined plain. Low thrum murmurs rolling in the dim worn rain. Far crest wanderers moving in a fierce cold flow. Frostband hearts hammering where the high winds blow. Surging through the Iron Veil climb. Hard cold jacket snapping in a fast road prime. Crash dust vortices splitting on the jag rim sweep. Dry
Gorge pressure roaring from the gravel deep. Cliff-line footfalls pounding in a sharp draw ride. Drift strike riders flaring where the red bound lies. Rebellion driving a full thrust flare. Bold clash hollow slicing through the canyon air. Quick rail phantom storming in a brute force glare. Rock burn spirits rising with a no fear stare. Let that rumble break, shake the long ridge bare. We're running in a full thrust flare. Cold hammer engines grinding in a rough wind spin. Slow but kid shadows lunging as the flats grind thin. Dust line vectors bucking in a hot span roar. Stone crest figures diving down the raw edge floor. Heat pulls tremors stretching in a black wind glide. Grim front allies pushing with a storm back stride. Rebellion driving a full thrust flare. Bold clash hollow slicing through the canyon air. Quick rail phantom storming in a brute force glare. Rock burn spirits rising with a no fear stare. Let that rumble break, shake the long ridge bare. We're running in a full thrust flare. Cinder embers gliding on a steel crisp plain. Low grind murmurs trembling in a soft storm rain. Far stone roamers shifting in a raw bright flow. Iron veil hearts roaring where the high winds blow. Chatter in the midday glow. Sand on our boots from the undertow. Old straw hats flapping in the coastal breeze. We trade jokes loud as the gulls on the seas. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on, wavelet laughter keeping us strong. Radio humming through the winding pines. Freedom jumping in our sunstruck minds. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on, feeling alive where the wide winds spawn. Cold peach soda from a roadside shack. Polaroid moment spilling from a pack. Painted fences sway in the evening hue. High grass shimmers like it's dancing too. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on, wavelet laughter keeping us strong. Radio humming through the winding pines. Freedom jumping in our sunstruck minds. Sea breeze, lucky miles roll on, feeling alive where the wide winds spawn.
found. Sea breeze, oh, sea breeze, oh, sea breeze. Oh, yeah. Hey.
Clover dust whirling on a midday crest. Guitar cases rattling in the truck bed rest. Main Street muffins warm in a paper sack. We swap half secrets on the old dirt track. Hilltop sun rider days roll free. Golden laughter spilling wild from me. Skipping rhythms through the orchard shade. Echoes jumping where the cool streams fade. Hilltop sun rider days roll free. Bright as a spark in a fresh born breeze. Paint chip barns with the doors pulled wide. Kids tossing roadside flowers inside. Honey jar light on the ridge fence beams. We chase shadows like they're part of our dreams. Hilltop sun rider days roll free. Golden laughter spilling wild from me. Skipping rhythms through the orchard shade. Echoes jumping where the cool streams fade. Hilltop sun rider days roll free. Bright as a spark in a fresh born No set path when the hillside glows. Just feet in motion where the warm wind blows. Every turn blooms something new to see. A little more life in a wandering spree.